Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Joel Leyden for the Israel News Agency. We are meeting here today to discuss the historic peace agreement between the State of Israel and the United Arab Emirates. With us, we have Dr. Yossi Olmert, Professor of Middle East Studies over at the University of South Carolina, formerly the director of the Israeli government press office. And we have Reserve Colonel Olivier Rafowitz, who works as a strategic consultant in politics and communications. This is a day that I believe that many of us have been waiting for. It's a day that Israel welcomes. Israel has always done everything in its power to achieve peace. This is a mission, a goal of the Israeli government, of all of our governments throughout all the years. And now that we have a peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates, and I believe that's going to be followed by several other Arab nations, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to unfold. In regards to Yossi being here, I just want to say thank you, Yossi, for giving me my press card about 20 years ago when you worked in the government press office, and to Olivier for treating me nicely and making sure that I had food when we were in Bethlehem during Operation Defensive Shield. I am now going to unmute Yossi, and I'm going to unmute Olivier, and your opening comments, Yossi. Bivakasha, please.
You hear me now? Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Joel, your credentials 30 years ago, so okay, let's put the record straight. Now, it's ironic, but if we have to be grateful to an outside actor, it may have been very, very connected with what is happening and perhaps even mostly responsible to it. It's to the Islamic Republic of Iran. You know, look, let's face it. In the last 5 or 6 years, we have seen a consistent trend whereby the Sunni states of the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Oman, but not Qatar for all kinds of reasons, have basically shifted their priorities in terms of their overall strategic security into any other issue that was at that time, including the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to the question of Iran. The Sunni-Shia factor is not always understood outside of the Middle East. And I can tell you, and that will surprise our viewers and listeners, I have in my classes always some Muslim students, and it's fascinating to listen to them. When they talk about the Shias, I am appalled by the venom. It is just unbelievable how all this questionism has filtered through. And I've had students from Saudi Arabia, from UAE and other such countries, and I understood it firsthand in that sense. Why are they so worried of Iran? Because of multiple reasons, but don't rule out the religious factor. And that's, by the way, ironic that the religious factor on the one hand leads countries like Saudi Arabia and of course UAE and Bahrain and Oman is a different case, they are not exactly Sunnis. It leads them to be more moderate towards Israel, but at the same time, and Sunni power Turkey is becoming more militant against Israel, using also the religious factor, let alone Iran as the leader of the Shia world. So the fear from Iran has shifted the strategic interest of many countries in the Middle East. And by the way, take also Sudan. Remember, under the dictator Bashir, there were good relations between Sudan and Iran. Once they decided in Sudan to shift course and they brought down Bashir, came also the breakthrough with Israel. The public meeting between Netanyahu and the leader of the Sudanese junta, we should say, was a big event as well. So the fear from Iran. But there is another point here, and that will be the end of my initial answer to you. I am paying great attention to what Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday about the achievements of UAE. And I'll tell you why. It is very interesting, perhaps even fascinating to see that an other country that is looking ahead and trying to build a future which is not exclusively based on just oil and energy, and they're looking for some other ways in order to improve their overall economy, they look to Israel. And that's exactly where the startup nation is starting to pay off to Israel. Now, I don't want to get into all kinds of speculations about the exact volume of what would be the trade between Israel and the UAE. All this is too early to predict. But the potential there is by far than what it was when Israel had the peace treaties with Egypt, even with Egypt and Jordan. The very last point is, it's not yet a peace treaty. It will take time for the formal signing of a peace treaty. And remember how it was with Egypt. Sadat visited November of 77. The formal peace treaty was in March of 79. Camp David was in between September of 78. So we may see ups and downs. We may see ups and downs, but there is no way back.
So Yossi, let me ask you a question. We read and we heard from Netanyahu that there was going to be normalization of our relations. That we are going to be exchanging full diplomatic relations. Embassy will be Abu Dhabi, Jerusalem, hopefully Jerusalem. I don't know if that came up yet. That'll be interesting. I don't think that's been.
They will not do it in Jerusalem. They will not do it in Jerusalem.
Okay,
they will not, I can assure you that.
I didn't read that anyplace, so maybe that's coming up here first. You know, where will Abu Dhabi have its embassy? That'll be interesting. I do know that Abu Dhabi is looking forward to having its citizens visit the Al-Aqsa. This is very, very important to them. This was one of the conditions of the peace treaty itself. And we welcome, I as an Israeli, I believe all of us welcome our friends from UAI to Israel to enjoy our beaches, to enjoy our mutual history together. So a question that I have now for Olivier, from a strategic security perspective, what do you see? How do you think this came apart in the first place?
Yeah, good morning to everybody, and I'm very pleased to be invited to your panel about this so important. I will try to be, I would say, clear, because it's a very complicated issue. It looks simple, but it's not simple, not at all. It's not a new thing that are existing relations between Israel and some Arab states, even if these relations were not official. But Yossi, because he was also at some very interesting positions when he was younger, we used to have for a long time very serious relationships with countries, with leaders, Muslim countries without official diplomatic relations. That's a fact. This fact now has been, I would say, disclosed to maturation with this new diplomatic development between Israel and Abu Dhabi. But I think we have to be very, very careful not to compare exactly what happened with Egypt, with Jordan, and with UAE. Why? Because with Egypt, Menachem Begin made an agreement with a state where we have been in a very military complicated situation. Yitzhak Rabin made peace with Jordan, was also part of war environment with Israel. With UAE, there is no war situation. So it's not exactly a peace agreement. It is more, I would say, a diplomatic, very positive development, but we have not been in. What is a big change? The big change, to my opinion, not only to mine, belongs to the fact that with this new country joining the Israeli relationship with other countries, the binary approach of the Israeli-Arab conflict is over. We are now new countries, Arab countries, who are ready to make peace, to make open diplomatic links with Israel, whatever is happening right now with the Palestinian issue. That means that for the first time, for many, many years, openly, new countries, like Yossi Olmert just mentioned before, are looking, first of all, to their own national interests, close to Israel, and not to waste this incredible opportunity for them of development in science, in technology, because of the Palestinian so-called big, to my opinion, is changing. Not so quickly, but it's changing. And the Palestinians now are trying to find new allies. Maybe for the first time, they're not Arabs. They go to the Turks and they go to the Iranians. So the Palestinian issue is now very important for the non-Arab, and for us as Israel, it makes our situation much more, I would say, comfortable. I'm a little bit cautious, of course, but much more comfortable because of Iran. World understand that his own interest, his own national interest, his own military interest is to get close to Israel. I mean, it's something like couldn't be unthinkable 20, 30 years ago, and now it's happening. And just this morning, I was reading some newspapers in France, and the French government, diplomatic development, but is very happy because they believe that with this development, Israel will give up the annexation process. So they are not ready to openly say that something new is coming out in the Middle East. And in a military point of view, just my last sentence, in a military strictly point of view, this development means two things. One, the anti-Iran axis is getting clearer and stronger. And maybe tomorrow, Bahrain or Saudis or other countries will join this new situation. The Iranian will believe or could believe that they are more and more in danger. So the risk of military Iranian is maybe more serious than before. They will not use directly their own forces. They will use, like it used to be in the past, proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Shiite militias in Iraq. Also, you have some Shiite groups in Abu Dhabi, workers, people, whatever. So everything is getting more and more clear, but also the risks are not disappearing.
Joel, I would like to follow on what Olivier explained so clearly and nicely, but to take a little bit exception to 2 points here, or maybe to elaborate a little bit. The first one about the Palestinian component of it. I mean, let's face it, look, yes, it is no more as it used to be the central key issue for the Arab countries. And I said it as well, and we are together. I do not or diminish annexation or the application of sovereignty in order to justify to the Arab and Islamic world what they are doing. That is to say, the Palestinian issue is there in the background, but, and here I agree with Olivier, from a much better perspective to Israel. Listen to the announcement that they made, both in Abu Dhabi and also their ambassador in Washington. They talked about the need to have peace with the Palestinians. They talked about the need for two-state solution, and let's not forget all that. That's what they say. That's what they mean. But they did not mention the borders of 67, any specifics about whatever it is. That is to say, you can argue that it is in a way a lip service. You can also argue, look, they really mean it, and we have to take it into account. So, I mean, it still is an open question to see how it will. The other point is about Iran. Look, there's no question that the Iranians now are in a less comfortable situation than what they were. And the reason for that is, as Olivier said about the French, I don't want to offend the French, but we know why the French are supportive of all that. They want to keep their deals with the UAE. The Iranians is that, yes, of course, they can send their proxies against the UAE, and they will do it perhaps, and also against the Saudi, but they do it to countries that are having a lot of support in the Western world for economic and commercial reasons, which is to say that it puts them in a very uncomfortable position. Everybody would understand it. All of a sudden, there will be troubles in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia and all that. Everybody understands who does it and why, and it will put in danger a lot of investments of Western countries in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, wherever it is, that are already that they want to have. So the point I'm trying to make here is, altogether, it is from a strategic perspective, as it stands now, and I emphasize the word now, is a great achievement for Israel. There's no question about that. But bear in mind that the time from now onwards until the formalities will be crystallized into a specific written agreement will be crucial. And one thing that I would advise, therefore, the Israelis is to be careful in what they say and how they say it. I give you a little example that might arouse some laughter here, but trust me, it's serious. Netanyahu gave a great speech yesterday within his good form. He made a big mistake, though. He said the Persian Gulf. You don't say to the Arabs the Persian Gulf. We need to be very careful in what we are doing now, how we express, yes, it's serious, how we express. These are people that represent a scale of cultural values that are not so familiar only in the rest of the Western world. So I'm just making this point to indicate to you what could be and what might be obstacles along the road which we don't always think about.
Yossi, let me thank you for your comments, Olivier. Picking up on what you've just stated, Yossi, I believe that we're not speaking in one language, but we're really speaking in three languages. I believe that Israel and the United Arab Emirates have perhaps three different audiences. We have our domestic audience. When Netanyahu speaks, he's also speaking to the Israeli people. So that's one demographic.
Sure.
When he's speaking,
that's his main audience.
That's one of his audiences. The other audience are our friends in the United Arab Emirates, a different audience, and the third audience is the global audience. Which is more important? I'm not going to go into right now, but I believe that Netanyahu, with his extensive diplomatic and security experience, is very aware of cross-cultural communications. The point you made in regards to stating Persian Gulf, I'm not going to criticize the speech writers. And I want to, by the way, welcome openly Mark Regev. If you're watching this, welcome back to Jerusalem from England. You're badly needed, and I'm glad you're back in Jerusalem working with Netanyahu. Mark Regev was the Israeli ambassador to England, and before that he was the spokesperson of the Prime Minister's office, and now he's back as spokesperson. What I would like to look at for a moment and to address is, with every peace process, to achieve peace, sides have to make sacrifices. The Israelis appear to have sacrificed the so-called territories we refer to as Judea, Samaria. The world refers to it as the West Bank, our biblical homeland, cultural, historical, and I believe from a legal perspective, it's legally our land. But this is not the discussion right now. The discussion is that we have suspended any action in terms of annexation. We didn't say we're not going to do it. We've just simply suspended that. And our good friends at the UAE have accepted that. In doing so, we have also upset many of our friends, our Jewish friends, who are sitting in Judea, Samaria. They feel as though they got the wrong end of the stick here, and we've upset many Palestinians.
Yeah.
As far as our Jewish brethren go, as far as our brothers and sisters who live in Judea, Samaria, I say to you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We wish you all the very, very best. I don't believe anyone's going to be saying lehitraod or shalom to you. The important thing to embrace is the fact that we have more security this morning. We had, I think, the same security yesterday afternoon, last week, last month, but as Olivier had stated, we're only coming out openly in regards to quiet peace that we've had actually for many years. We had a quiet peace with Egypt before Sadat stepped off the aircraft. And we have a quiet peace with the majority of the Arab world. So with every peace agreement, we have sides that are disappointed. To those who are living in Judea, Samaria, savlanut, patience. I believe that's the key word. And to the Palestinian Authority, my words would be a lot different. I understand this is being broadcast, so I have to be somewhat diplomatic or PC. But I will also say to you, savlanut, your objective, your missions of wiping out the state of Israel will not be achieved. To be fair, to be treated fairly, with the same equality that all Israelis are being treated with in a democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, you have. And I believe that the majority of Palestinians that live in Israel are far more happy living in Israel than any other Arab state. Now, with that, you have two sides. The Palestinians unhappy. You have the people in Judea, Samaria, somewhat unhappy. But I believe it will be lamshich, because following the United Arab Emirates, I believe will be other nations. So, Yossi, my question to you is, what nations do you see following the UAE in terms of formalizing and normalizing diplomatic relations with the state of Israel? And how, and what's,
well, we have
what's the time frame you see that taking place in?
We have the regular culprits. I'm joking, Saudi Arabia, not immediately, it will take more time. Bahrain, Oman, I guess Bahrain will be the next. That's the speculation. Oman. Look, the formalities here are less important. The dynamic definitely more important. The trend, the process, much more important. And here is a comment about the application of annexation sovereignty and how it all fits into that. Look, for 53 years, it didn't happen. Menachem Begin did not do it. Yitzhak Shamir did not do it. Historic leaders of the Jewish right wing, the Zionist, revisionist Zionism and all that. If a year and a half ago, they that happened. Sovereignty was brought into the Israeli agenda in the last year and a half for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with a lot that we discussed. So I don't want to get into all that. But I was interested to read that the mayor of Efrat, Oded Revivi, said specifically, I support it. And if it means giving up on application of sovereignty or whatever right now, so be it. So even there you can see differences of opinion. But let me move on quickly, very briefly, a big question that you asked. Look, take Bahrain. Here is the example of what Iran does. The majority of people in Bahrain are Shia Muslims. The Khalifa royal family are Sunni Muslims. The Iranians already tried to bring down the regime in Bahrain before. The Saudis helped them militarily to prevent it. I mean, it's no question that for Bahrain, Iran is the enemy. And there is no question that Bahrain prepared the ground for years towards what's happening and will happen in the near future. They had a woman Jewish ambassador in the US, which of course she didn't have anything to do with policy, but she was the good face of Bahrain toward Israel through the Jewish community in the US. So you see recognition like the UAE are doing. So when you ask me about the timetable, it will take more time than what people think. It's not going to be so quick. And as I said before, I will just say it again once more, there will be ups and downs. There will be made peace. All those countries in the Gulf jumped on him and condemned him. And Sadat, being the leader of Egypt, the leader of the Arab world, 5,000 years of civilization, he said, who are those Bedouins from the desert to tell us what to do? Now the so-called, I'm not saying it in an offensive way, the Bedouins of the desert are making peace with Israel, and their leader repeats exactly the same words as Sadat. That's very interesting.
Yossi, thank you. I want to ask Olivier. I'd like to ask Olivier a quick question, a follow-up on this, and that is, Olivier, is the Arab world making peace? I would say most of the Arab world, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, are they making peace with Israel because they want to enjoy Israeli high tech, they want to enjoy trade, tourism, or are they making peace with Israel to create a coalition against Iran?
I would like to say two things before, if I may. Paradoxically speaking, the price that we are paying now to this agreement is much higher than the price that we have to pay to Egypt or to Jordan. Because to give up or to postpone annexation to Judea and Samaria is not a small issue. It's a DNA issue for Zionism and for the future of the state of Israel. And what is very paradoxal, to my opinion, not only to mine, I believe, is that the fact that with Egypt, Sinai, and of course many villages on the Yeshuvim, to Jordan it was much more, we say, smaller in extent, but with UAE, we're actually giving up something that we planned to do openly, officially, a few months ago. And the price is very, very, very high because we are not sure that we could have the same opportunity like we had a few months ago to repeat this process of annexation. That's why, politically speaking, internally in Israel, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of polemics, because why we had to give up before actually doing at least, I would say, even a reduced move And when Mr. Netanyahu, who is till today leading the right wing in Israel, politically speaking, if he does not do it, no one else will do it. So maybe we are also facing not only a new diplomatic development, but also facing a new political situation in Israel. Because there is a risk that right-wing people, supporters, will not see Netanyahu anymore as a Yamin, a right-wing leader of the right wing in Israel, but someone else should replace him. Because again, you give up because you make peace with a state that, between you and me, many people knew that with this country, I respect, of course, this country, there was already very good relationships. So what is the case? What is the deal? The only explanation that we can now think about is that Netanyahu, from the very beginning, was not the very beginning with a solution. That's one thing, but this thing, to my opinion, will have a tremendous and deep impact in the next weeks, in the next months. That will maybe the reason for next elections, and not coronavirus. To get back to your question very briefly, these countries are very nice countries, very rich countries, but they are very weak. Militarily speaking, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman are beautiful land with beautiful people, but they are not capable. Even if they are buying tremendous amount of military weaponry, they are not capable to face states like Iran. So for many years, they were looking to United Kingdom and then to America. But UK and America are not there anymore. So the only possible potential ally on the ground close to them is Israel. But between you and me, we are close to them, but we're not going to get our boots on the ground of Saudi or the Emirates. So why this situation is now going on? Because it is the only solution for them to get out their isolation, their threatening situation, and to get close to Washington through Jerusalem. And the price that they are going to pay for that is priceless, because there is no other alternative for them.
Yossi?
Well, so here we start having some differences with Olivier, but that's okay. You know, we are about to get into the Shabbos, and we are Jews, you know, so the question of annexation has never been on the agenda.
It's true.
The question of the application of sovereignty was never on the agenda. Why would I say it now? Because I wrote it for many months and published it, and it's not, I don't want to get into an ideological debate now whether it should be or not. It was not on the agenda because, and how do I know it? Because even Netanyahu, at the 8 days of the publication of the Trump peace plan, the Trump people made it very clear, either you get it as a package deal or, and the way it was presented to the Israeli public was, we can do whatever we want about sovereignty, and then we'll see what we can do about the two-state solution. And this is not what Jared Kushner and others were briefing people in Washington all the time. And we're leaking it to the press, and we're making clear that everybody understood it. And it was very obvious to every political observer that Netanyahu would not go against the Trump presidency for all kinds of obvious reasons. And so it happened. So now we may hear, I say we may hear from fans of Netanyahu, and yes, many of them, that he proved his political genius by using a bogey in order to get peace with the UAE. It's the opposite of what the settlers are saying. And I'll tell you something, Olivier, that will surprise you. I think that more people in Israel will buy that narrative than the one you said, not because you are wrong or I'm right, but because the reasons as to why people vote in Israel, we know, are complicated. In the end of the day, there is this loyalty to the party. I mean, you know, remember there was this joke about these two comedians in the past cursing Likud, this minister is bad, that minister is bad. So then they asked each other, so whom are you going to vote for? Of course, Likud. So this is something else. I don't want to get into Israeli politics. The last point here is, and I really hope that there will be more questions from the room, if there are. Yes, you talked about the weakness of these countries, and there's another element to the weakness. Don't forget, you talk here about family-run shakedowns.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not Egypt.
Yeah.
Egypt is Egypt. It's not even Jordan. And therefore, we have to be very, very careful in the overall build-up of expectations, of aspirations, and the way we pronounce all this. It is a very fragile situation.
Yossi, Olivier, let me ask you this question now. Again, with everything that's good, you take lemons, you make lemonade, and it looks like we've got, Baruch Hashem, thank God, a lot of lemonade on our tables today. That's the way it appears. What appears and what's actually the reality. I believe the reality actually matches what we're hearing right now, because we have had peace with many of these Arab states for many years. We're just, as stated, openly exposing the fact that we do talk to each other. We are involved in trade. And the question that I have for you, Olivier, is, do you see any fallout? And also, Yossi, do you see any fallout from Iran, any immediate fallout in terms of Iran trying to flex its muscles and saying, we are not happy about this. We see an apparent coalition being formed to attack us. Do you see Iran taking either steps of terrorism against Israel, against the United States, and against the United Arab Emirates, and or perhaps preparing themselves for an all-out war before we solidify what appears to be a coalition against Iran?
Listen, the fact that in Israel this process is under the, I would say, the to diplomatic ties with Arab states. It's not impossible, only my mind. It's not impossible that this move from the UAE, and maybe other countries will join it, the reason for it is because we know, the US know, the Israeli knows that Iran is planning something. It's not impossible that we're actually anticipating something because Iran is planning something. And not because we are doing that, they are doing something. They are still doing things without any Israeli diplomatic process. But we have to understand that Iran, like said very clearly, Yossi Olmert, Iran is in a very bad situation, economically speaking, medically speaking, with the COVID-19. But they are still getting stronger by launching missiles, satellites, and getting close to the atomic bomb. Let's not forget that Iran, day after day, is getting closer and closer to the atomic bomb. So maybe the situation is very at high level right now, and the military risk in the area. and maybe countries are taking open move because something is going on. And maybe the next step will not be to wait for Iran. Maybe the next step will be to see US vessels doing something against Iran.
Yossi, let me ask you.
Yossi knows it very well. He was a senior official.
So to leave the strategic military security perspective.
We are waiting for the sorry.
That's okay. It's cutting out. The internet is operating as it normally does on a summer's day.
Should I say something, or Olivier, you're still?
Yeah. Yossi, I wanted to ask you.
Olivier, are you still talking? Olivier.
No, please go.
Yossi, I wanted to ask you, how soon do you believe that we will have real, warm, sincere relations? I mean, can we actually get on board an aircraft tomorrow and go shopping in Abu Dhabi?
We already have had warm relations with them. They helped us with all kinds of corona stuff that was brought to Israel by Mossad. There already were flights of UAE planes to good airport. But to the question about Iran, which is a great question, of course, and I agree with Olivier, but look, I believe that the Iranians have shown to us throughout the years that they prefer to work through proxies. So in the scale of likelihoods, direct Iranian attack, which leaves no doubt as to the fact that they're behind it, I doubt it very much. I don't rule it out, I doubt it. Proxies, the likelihood is at least 50%, but the biggest proxy is in big trouble now. This is Hezbollah in Lebanon. And there is something else that we have to bear in mind that wasn't mentioned about Iran, or two other things, very, very briefly, I would say. One, the distance between Israel and Iran has been shortened a great deal against Iran this week. I think it's understood, right? The distances are working against the Iranians now, not against us.
So Yossi,
and secondly,
okay.
Let me just finish 1 second. There have been all kinds of incidents in Iran recently. Not everything that happens in Iran is by Israel. Bear in mind that there are ethnic underground anti-regime organizations, be them the Baluchis or the Arabs in Khuzestan or the Kurds or others, that has increased their activities. Can be sure that they are being helped by people from the outside.
Yossi, Olivier, Sammy or Dan, do you have any questions for Yossi or for Olivier?
I don't, but this was an amazing discussion, really informative.
And you say thanks to Joel, he's behind all that. You can't say no to Joel, you know.
Yes, I do have a question. Which countries, hopefully, you know, do you, I mean, your estimate, your guess, but which one is probably more receptive at this particular stage once UAE agreed to have relations with it?
There is a good chance that Oman, Bahrain could join the adventure, but let's not forget something very, very important, sir. The key actor, the key player in the Middle East, in the Arab world, beside Egypt, is Saudi. And today, the Saudis I think, are very close, very, very close to make the move and to go to the same process with Israel. Of course, it will be very different, but like just said Yossi Olmert, I repeat, because he said it from the very beginning. We have to thank not only Mr. Trump or Mr. Netanyahu, but we have to thank the Iranian regime to be so dangerous and so threatening for these countries. And again, like I said, there is no other alternative for them if they want not only to be, but to survive in this terrible environment, to join the bad guys. The good guys is us, is Israel.
So you feel that the Saudis who may follow, they will do it strictly for security reasons?
Well, the Saudis.
I don't understand, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I understand if they will follow, they will make an agreement with Israel. But will it be only for security reasons or possibly for a real relationship?
The Saudis, look, that's a great question, Sammy. The Saudis, you know, the MBS, the Crown Prince, he talked a lot, less so now, by the way. It's not so clear what his position really is, and we need to carefully monitor all that. But he made the point of we need to open up, to diversify our economy and all that. And obviously, there's a long line of countries waiting to fill into the vacuum, you know. But don't forget that they have a problem that was already indicated before by Olivier, the so-called uncertainty about American policy. And who would be the next president and all that. The Saudis are very afraid if there is one relationship that has been constant throughout the ages with every administration in America, it was Saudi Arabia and the US, not Israel. As of the famous historic meeting between Roosevelt and King Ibn Saud on the 14th of February 1945, after which this President FDR said, in 5 minutes, I learned more about the Middle East than all my discussions with other people. And no American administration, including Obama, the liberal, the progressive, who bowed down to King Abdullah, if you remember, dared take issues with Saudi Arabia. It was like a sacred cow, more than a relationship with Israel. But now in the Democratic Party, the changes are not just about Israel. They are all over the place. And the Saudis are terrified by that. They are afraid by that. So for them, Israel is yet another element in their insurance, one, but they need it also in their overall umbrella.
Yossi,
Very interesting.
Yossi, Olivier, Demi.
You know, I think that
Let me
most-
cut in here. Let me cut in over here because we're down to about 10 more minutes. Wanted to ask a quick question.
Joel,
If we go back a few years,
I think that the most serious.
Olivier, go ahead.
I say that if all the Arab, I will say that because I want to finalize with a positive note. I would say that if all the Arab countries are making peace with Israel, the biggest problem will be where is the best hummus to have? In Jerusalem, in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, or in somewhere else?
Oh, in Jerusalem, what are you talking about? Rahmo.
Okay. Because, you know, if we are fighting for hummus, we have real peace.
Yeah. Well, there are stories about hummus and peacemaking in the Middle East. I wrote about one of those in one of my articles, but not now. Okay.
Now,
Not now.
Olivier, you beat me to that. I was going to end this program on the hummus note, on the hummus wars, on the hummus content.
Exactly.
I mean, you beat
And
me
make
to
sure
that.
that everybody knows it's kosher hummus.
But what I want to ask seriously, what I wanted to ask seriously here is we go back a few years.
Yeah.
We remember that at Camp David, Yasser Arafat, the Palestinians were again given a chance to sign a peace agreement. The Palestinians were again given the opportunity to say, yes, let's have peace. I mean, anyone that knows the history of the Middle East, even the basic history, 1948, no. It's been no, 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 no. It's either everything or nothing. It's from the Jordan to the sea. And Israel will not accept those terms. Israel will not accept any terms that threaten the lives of our civilians, of our children. So one is reality and one is not reality. But a piece of reality that did surface by Yasser Arafat was right before signing the peace agreement, which they didn't sign. Yasser Arafat sat down with Yitzhak Rabin, and they both lit up a cigarette. And while they were dragging on their cigarettes, and they were comfortable, they were getting to know each other somewhat, Arafat looked at Rabin, and he said, Yitzhak, do you think I really want to walk? Do you think I really want you to walk behind my casket? If I sign this agreement here in Washington, you'll be walking behind my casket. Do you think I want that? Now,
Joel, look, this is, you know what, let me, for PR and Asbara purposes, we are on the right side now. We want peace, we do peace, they are the rejectionists. Here is the bad point about it. And always think a step ahead, always think another step ahead so that you can be strategic. The problem really is that the Palestinian conflict with Israel is becoming a domestic Israeli problem. And that is changing the landscape in Israel in a very big way. It is not going to happen immediately. It will happen. Look, I was write a review of a new book by the Middle East Journal, you know, that's very prestigious publication about the decline of the left wing. Point is that when it comes to external issues, the left wing is irrelevant. We saw it again. But if we are not going to have somehow, okay, somehow a political solution with the Palestinians, we shall have to deal with them inside Israel, and that will change everything in a way that we can't even foresee right now. And for all of us who are happy to say, we see that we already reject, yes, that's good PR in Asbara point, but beyond that, let's think about the future. If we don't come to some kind of a solution with the Palestinians, we shall have to do it between ourselves.
Yossi, Olivier, what I like to say, when people talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, is there really isn't an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There really is not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's an Israeli-Iranian conflict. It's the Iranians that pay off Hamas.
Okay, that's true. We talked about that, obviously.
I mean, so are we really confronting a Palestinian population which is extremely unhappy, that really wants to have their own land? Or are we really
Joel, the problem is very simple. You might be members of the Reshima Meshutefet today in the Knesset. You might have 45 of them in a matter of 10 years. That is another Israel, if it happens. That is another Israel. So we need to think about the future as well.
All right, so to wrap this up, I would, please go ahead.
No,
Can I ask a question on a different subject? Okay, to change it. What's happening with the coalition right now in Israel? Is Bibi just using it as a ploy? Because somehow they don't work together. It's not a real unity government. Yossi?
Well, very briefly, he wants another elections. I think that is wrong. We don't need, the country doesn't need it, you know, the polls are not good for him. They're very good to Naftali Bennett, but who knows? I mean, look, the polls in Israel are what they are, you know. They're good for the moment, they're taken like everywhere else. I hope that, but Olivier said something great before. It is changing the landscape in Israel, and maybe for the first time, there will be a strong right-wing alternative to Likud, like the Tehia party wanted to be after Camp David in 79, 80, and failed to be, and Naftali Bennett at one. Now the polls give him 18. So it will be good for Israel if he could become more centrist. There will be right-wing alternative, and all this right-left schism and division, which is really becoming a problem, will be kind of reduced. But okay, let's wait and see.
Yossi, Olivier, I'd like to wrap up right now with a closing comments by yourself, Yossi, and by yourself, Olivier. And the closing comments, in the closing comments, I would like you to provide two messages. Yossi and Olivier, I would like you to provide a message to our friends in the United Arab Emirates and the other Gulf states. I would like you to address them. And after addressing them, I would like you to address the Israeli public. Yossi?
Very briefly, we welcome every desire for peace by every Arab, by every Muslim, by every person, you know, and there's no people in Israel. Shabbat Shalom, and let's hope that Beitar Yerushalayim will do better this season than before. Everything will be great. Olivier.
Olivier.
Salam alaikum and shukran. Salam alaikum and shukran. We are very pleased and very honored to have a new nation in the area joining us, and we are also joining you, and together, because that the issue of togetherness, together we will build more, we will create more, and we will make more people happy, secured, and healthy. The other issue is that it's not the end, it's only the beginning. And we hope that it's only a big start.
For the Israel News Agency, this has been Joel Leyden with Dr. Yossi Olmert and Reserve Colonel Olivier Rafowitz. Thank you for joining us today. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom. Peace.